The most repeated story in business history goes like this. Nokia ruled the world. Apple released the iPhone. Nokia ignored it. Nokia died. It's clean. It's satisfying. It fits on a PowerPoint slide in every MBA program on the planet. And it is wrong. Not just incomplete, wrong. In a way that has caused thousands of companies to draw exactly the backwards lesson from Nokia's collapse. Because here's what actually happened. Nokia saw the iPhone coming. They built a touchscreen smartphone before Apple did. They had internal reports in 2004, 3 years before the first iPhone, describing the exact device that would eventually destroy them, and they still collapsed. That's not a story about missing a trend. That's a far more disturbing story. That's a story about what happens when a company sees the future clearly and still can't survive it. And understanding why that happened, the actual mechanism, changes everything about what you think Nokia got wrong. In 2001, a Nokia engineer named Ari Hakkarainen sat in a lab in Tampere, Finland, holding a prototype. It had a color touchscreen. It connected to the internet. It had a camera. His team called it internally the communicator concept. Management looked at it, nodded politely, and buried it in a drawer. This wasn't a rumor. In 2013, MIT researchers Qui Hui and Timo Vuori published a landmark study based on 76 interviews with Nokia executives and engineers conducted while the company was still falling. Their conclusion was jarring. The engineers knew. The middle managers knew. Even some senior leaders knew. The problem wasn't ignorance. It was fear. Here's what he and Vuori found. Nokia's board had built a culture of what they called psychological silence. Engineers who raised concerns about Symbian, Nokia's aging software platform, were quietly sidelined. Managers who brought bad news up the chain found themselves passed over for promotion. The internal language had shifted. You didn't say this product has problems. You said we're addressing the challenges. You didn't say we're losing ground. You said we're monitoring the competitive landscape. By 2005, Nokia's stock price had tripled in 5 years. They were shipping 265 million phones a year. The number felt like proof. It wasn't proof, it was a blindfold. When a company gets that large, that successful, that dominant, something strange happens to the flow of information inside it. Bad news stops traveling upward, not because people are hiding it, though sometimes they are, but because the organization has quietly, structurally made honesty expensive. A junior engineer raising a red flag about Symbian's stability wasn't just offering a technical opinion. They were implicitly questioning the entire strategy of the people who signed their paychecks. That's not a conversation most people choose to have voluntarily. So the knowledge stayed at the bottom, and at the top, decisions were made on clean, optimistic numbers. January 9th, 2007. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage in San Francisco in a black turtleneck.
Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything.
Within 48 hours, Nokia's internal teams had a full competitive analysis on his desk. Not just one. Multiple teams independently reached similar conclusions. The iPhone's touchscreen interface would redefine user expectations, and Symbian, Nokia's software, could not realistically compete with it.
You zoom in or zoom out by pinching or unpinching with your fingers. It's spectacular.
The analysis was accurate. The response was catastrophic. The board looked at Apple's market share, less than 3% of smartphones by the end of 2007, and dismissed the threat. Nokia was at 50%. The numbers said, no danger. But the numbers were measuring the wrong thing. They were measuring where consumers were, not where consumers were going. They were measuring the installed base, not the desire base. Meanwhile, Nokia's engineers were trying to rebuild Symbian from the inside. The problem was, Symbian wasn't designed to be rebuilt. It had been written in the late 1990s for a world of physical buttons and tiny screens. Its architecture was fundamentally incompatible with the fluid, app-driven experience the iPhone had just made standard. Porting Symbian into the touchscreen era wasn't renovation. It was trying to turn a rotary phone into a smartphone by painting it differently. the N97. Nokia's official answer to the iPhone. Released in 2009, it had a 5-megapixel camera. It had a slide-out keyboard, GPS, twice the storage of an iPhone 3G. Nokia's marketing called it the most advanced mobile computer in the world. The phone sold 2 million units in its first 3 months. Then the reviews came in. The Guardian called the touchscreen unresponsive and frustrating. Engadget ran a piece headlined, Nokia N97 review, 2 steps forward, 15 steps back. On tech forums across the internet, users were posting videos of themselves trying to scroll through menus, the phone freezing mid-swipe, rebooting without warning. Nokia's own App Store launched with around 3,000 apps. Apple's App Store in the same window had crossed 65,000. OV Maps was beautiful. Snake was legendary. But Nokia had built a wall of hardware specs around a rotten software core, and customers, slowly, then all at once, noticed. In September 2009, Nokia's executive VP for markets, Anssi Vanjoki, stood before a press conference and said something that no one at Nokia's level had said publicly before. He called the N97, Nokia's flagship, a tremendous disappointment in terms of consumer experience. The company's own VP on camera about their biggest product of the year. That's not a PR slip, that's a confession. But here's the part of the story that gets completely erased in the popular version. When journalists wrote the Nokia ignored the iPhone narrative, they were solving for the wrong variable. They found the most visible cause, an Apple product launch, and declared it the explanation. It was tidy. It was wrong. The iPhone accelerated Nokia's decline. It did not cause it. The actual cause had been building since the late 1990s. It was structural. It was cultural. And it had a name: organizational rigidity. In 2010, Nokia's board made a decision that felt bold in the moment. They hired Stephen Elop, a former Microsoft executive, as CEO, first outsider in Nokia's history. He arrived, spent 5 months listening, and then sent a company-wide memo that leaked to the press within days. His metaphor was a burning platform. Nokia, he said, was standing on an oil rig on fire, and the only option was to jump. The memo was described at the time as a masterclass in corporate honesty. The Wall Street Journal called it startling candor. Business schools began using it as a case study. And on one level, Elop was right. Symbian was dying. Android was winning. Something had to change. But the decision Elop made next, abandoning Symbian for Microsoft's Windows Phone, exposed the real flaw in the Nokia failed because of the iPhone narrative. Because if Nokia's problem had simply been not seeing disruption coming, then switching platforms should have worked. If it was just a technology choice problem, a new technology choice should have solved it. It didn't. Windows Phone arrived in late 2011 with the Lumia 800. The hardware was stunning. The design was genuinely innovative. A clean, tile-based interface unlike anything else on the market. The Verge called it the best Windows Phone device yet in its launch day review. In 2012, Nokia shipped around 4 million Lumia units in a single quarter. Apple shipped 47 million iPhones that same quarter. The problem wasn't the hardware. The problem wasn't even the software. The problem was that the ecosystem, the apps, the developers, the habits, the network effects, had already calcified around iOS and Android. Third-party developers had made their bets. They were not going to rebuild their apps for a third platform with 3% market share, and without the apps, consumers had no reason to choose it. Nokia had walked into a 2-player game after the draw had already happened, and the burning platform memo, for all its honesty about the present danger, had made it worse. When Elop told the world that anyone buying a Symbian phone was buying a dead end, he didn't just describe Nokia's problem. He announced it to every person who was considering a Nokia phone that week. Symbian sales dropped by more than a third in the following quarter. Elop had accelerated the fire while looking for the exit. By 2012, Nokia's stock had lost 98% of its value from its 2000 peak. And here, right here, is where the wrong lesson lodges itself permanently in the culture. Business media, business schools, TED Talks, and executive keynotes all landed on the same takeaway. Nokia failed because they were too slow to respond to disruption. Move faster, be more agile, disrupt yourself before someone else does. But the Hui and Vori research, the actual forensic analysis, the testimony of the engineers and managers who lived through it, all of it points somewhere else entirely. Nokia didn't fail because they were slow. They failed because their internal information system broke down. Because the gap between what engineers knew and what executives believed had grown wide enough to drive a company through. The engineers who saw the iPhone threat clearly in 2007, who mapped it, documented it, circulated memos about it, those engineers were not the people making decisions. And the people making decisions were being given numbers that made the threat look manageable because no one in the middle of that hierarchy wanted to be the person who delivered an unmanageable problem. That's not a speed problem. That's a truth problem. And the lesson, the one nobody teaches, is that the most dangerous thing a dominant company can do isn't ignore disruption. It's build a culture where the people who see disruption clearly cannot get that information to the people who have the power to act on it. You can move fast, pivot constantly, and disrupt yourself every year and still fail spectacularly if the information flowing through your organization is systematically filtered toward comfort. Nokia had the engineers. They had the data. They had the prototypes. They had the memos. In 2004, an internal team produced a concept device, touchscreen, internet-connected, camera-equipped, that would have competed directly with the 2007 iPhone. The concept existed. The capability existed. What didn't exist was a system that could take an uncomfortable truth from the bottom of the organization and make it actionable at the top. Apple didn't beat Nokia. Nokia's own org chart did. So the next time someone uses Nokia as a shorthand for "don't ignore disruption," which will happen approximately every week in business culture for the rest of your natural life, you can offer the more accurate version. Nokia saw it coming. They had the talent, the resources, and in some cases, the actual products. They didn't fail because of a blind spot. They failed because the organization had learned over years of extraordinary success to protect itself from bad news. And once a company learns to do that, even the people inside it who know the truth can't save it. The iPhone was the test. Nokia failed the test. But the test wasn't, did you see this coming? The test was, when the people at the bottom of your company know something that threatens everything, does that information reach the top, intact, undiluted, and in time to act on it? For Nokia, the answer was no. The lesson isn't move faster. The lesson is build organizations where truth travels.